Well, thanks so much, Shivani, for joining me on the podcast. I've been looking forward to this episode and having met you probably maybe about 6 or 7 months ago. But thanks again for joining.
So it's such a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, the first question I always ask is, tell me about your family.
Family. Well, it depends on where you start and stop, Ben. So I'm married. I've been with Scott for coming up to 17 years. Been married for 14. We have two great kids. We've got a 12-year-old daughter, Shanti, and we have an 11-year-old son. They were pretty close together, considering I left having kids still a little bit later. And we have a puppy and two cats and a bunch of fish. I've got my parents that live in South Australia. Scott's father's just unfortunately just passed away, but he grew up in Port Macquarie in a regional town in New South Wales. So that's us. He's an only child. I've got a lot of extended family back in India, but only one uncle and a cousin in Australia. But yeah, everybody else is still back in India.
Yeah, there you go. And how are you going at the moment communicating with them, given you kind of can't get back there just yet?
Yeah, look, it ebbs and flows. I used to go back every year. I've always led a group of women that we've always gone and done some volunteer work in India for the last almost 10 years. And that's been difficult to not use that opportunity to go and do something that's really close to my heart, but also be able to go and see some of the family members as well. Last year was really tough for them because there was a lot of deaths. I've had 4 people in my direct family pass away. Couple of them older, uncles and aunties, but also a cousin that was only 5 years older than me, pretty healthy, went into intensive care for COVID and never came out. And I grew up with him in the same city, so I knew him really well. So last year was really horrible and really tough, and even early this year. Now India seems to be getting vaccinated. I think on the PM Modi's birthday, they vaccinated 26 million people in one day, which is like crazy considering we can't get all our vaccinations sorted for a country of 26 million people. And so they seem to be a little bit more hopeful now that the last couple of conversations I've had with them.
Yeah, no, there you go. And you've spoken about your children, I think, every time we've met. So I'd love to sort of, if you can share, what do you do with them to keep that relationship, I guess, going well?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I'm a big one for rituals. I think that rituals are really important in life for me, but also us as a family. So one of the rituals we have is, growing up in an ethnic family was a lot about food. So we've got our daughter, when our trips got cancelled through COVID to go to Europe for a month. So she, in March of 2020, came up with a little whiteboard, a little magnetic whiteboard, and we've got a 2-week roster of food. So we travel around the world every night. And we repeat that menu every fortnight. So we've got Turkish and Japanese and Indian and Italian features twice because we all love Italian food. And we have, a Thai night. And so we revolved all around the world every fortnight. We have one leftovers night. Tonight's Aussie night. So we've got a potato bake and sausages and burgers happening. And so that's one of our rituals. So we try and make a big deal about going, what's for dinner tonight? Okay, they're like, yay, or they're like, I'm not sure I'm really into that anymore. We're a bit off Turkish at the moment. But, so that's a really, really important ritual, is to cook together, eat together, talk about our day together. We do the good, bad and the ugly every night at dinner tables. Yep. One of the things I know that I met you through EO or Entrepreneurs Organisation is, EO is really well known for a thing called Forum, where 7 or 8 people get together and they speak in a confidential space about what's happening in their business and their family and their personal. And I loved it so much. In fact, I met this great guy through EO. I'm not sure if you met Carlos Santoro, who is a pretty amazing guy. And he was running a forum, like a mini version of a forum with his family. Yeah. And I love that idea. So for about 15 months now, we run forum every Sunday. Every week. We call it a family meeting. So our kids are really funny. And, Ben, you and I know that we speak about in EO is not about giving advice, it's speaking from experience. So I love when my 11-year-old goes, and in my experience, I think this, and I'm trying not to go, oh, that's like so funny. I'm not, you've got a whole 11 years under your belt. But we try and run like a mini forum, and everybody's got to take turns facilitating. And at the moment, Scott's stuck across the border with his father's passing, and we haven't been able to get him back home. So he's been gone for almost 6 weeks. And we've still done that ritual every Sunday or Monday, one day a week, to just hold that family meeting in terms of what happens. And we have little actions that come out of it. You know, who needs to do what, and how the pet's going, and how's school going, and how's social stuff going. Are we doing too much, too little? So everybody has some input into how the family is run. I could go on, but I think the main thing for me growing up was treating my kids, whether they were 2 or now 11 and 12 or whether they're 20, I've always tried to treat them like a bit of an adult.
Yep.
You know, they'll go and get haircuts, and the hairdresser will say, you know, how do you want the haircut? I'm like, well, you're not cutting my hair, you're getting his hair or her hair.
Yeah.
So I've always let them make some decisions within reason, within reason, because my son got all these lines cut into his hair, and then the school went, you can't do that. I'm like, okay, so we will let the hairdresser know you can't do lines unless it's at the start of the school holidays.
Okay.
But within reason, just letting them make decisions on what they want to eat, who they want to hang out with, how they want the haircut, you know, and just letting them live by some of the not great choices that they make sometimes too.
Yep, I think we learn from those the most, I feel. Yeah, there you go. And I know this one's a bit tricky probably right now with Scott over the border, but I guess when he's home, what do you guys have in terms of rhythms to keep your marriage strong?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. When Scott and I first met, we were both, I had just my early 30s, he was in his mid-30s. And one of the things that was really obvious to us, having had long-term relationships that hadn't worked, was this idea of a contract. And so we have an annual contract.
Oh, wow.
With 1 page. We sign it usually on January 1 or 2 each year. And it's pretty simple. It just kind of lays out things that we want to do individually in that year. Yep. It lays out a couple of things that we want to do as couple that year. And, you know, for example, Scott a couple of years ago wanted to learn how to be a yoga teacher. He's in a corporate role in HR. So he said, I'm not leaving my corporate role to become a yoga teacher, but I want to deepen my practice. And that meant that he was going to be away 6 or 8 weekends in a year, on top of everything we both had on in our diaries. And so it was about supporting him in that contract and his goal for that year. You know, and so we kind of lay out some of our expectations, and we kind of not naive enough to think that just because you're together, you're going to be together for 30 years. I mean, a lot of people are together for 30 years, but they're not really happy. And so, you know, how do we kind of recommit to each other for a year? I find it, you know, I can't imagine being with anybody else, but I also don't want to go, yes, I'm with Scott till the day I die. I go, well, that just sounds so much. Whereas if you say, look, I've got a contract with him for a year, I go, awesome, I've got a year to work on it. It makes me, and it kind of makes us be sharper, I think, and say, well, how do you actually want to hang out together? Like, are you really committed to this, or are you just going to get a bit lax about, you know, oh yeah, we'll be here forever. So if you really want this to work, you've got to work at it and in it and on it. We also both love coffee. I try and not drink more than 1 a day, but we have a ritual, particularly since COVID, as we've both had to work and really now loving working from home more and more. We will go out for a coffee 4 or 5 out of 7 days. So we will either drop the kids and literally go and get a coffee, or on a weekend we'll just say, see you later, guys. We're off to the farmers markets to get a coffee and some fruit and veg, and we'll just have these little mini dates in there. And then we try and have 3 or 4 weekends away a year, and we do quite a lot of stuff with our family, but we're pretty also aware of the fact that, again, having kids had a little bit older, is that, you know, our kids will grow up, they will move on and do their own thing, and really not to wait for that to nurture our relationship and to work through it, you know, in little micro moments.
So many good tips already, and we're only just started. So thank you. And on the topic of family, you know, we were speaking beforehand about you being the first female in your family to actually work. Would you be able to share the background of that, and then what made you decide to change that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I feel so I don't know, lucky, privileged, not sure what the right word is there, Ben, but my parents moved from India to Australia when I was 11.
Mhm.
So, old enough where I can still read and write the language and understand my culture and my background. And I saw my mum who went to college. I saw my aunties. I saw my cousins, but none of them work. They were kind of, if I can almost say, they're married, and a lot of them made choices not to work. I've only got very few people, certainly in my direct lineage, nobody else has had the opportunity to work or certainly even run a business. And so when I moved to Australia from a very early age, a lot of people talk about, oh, it works, it pays the mortgage or it does this. Like, to me, work is a real privilege.
Mm.
And I just think that not only have I had an opportunity to get part of my education in India, but a lot of my education in Australia. And if you speak to my dad, who is probably, my number one fan, and vice versa, probably,
Awesome.
if you say to dad, and, look, why did you, Satish, move to Australia? He'll go, because I wanted to give Shivani the same opportunities as her brother and her uncles and her dad.
Wow.
And so he's a really pro women's, very, very big supporter of girls' education, and a really big supporter of me. So I feel like I've got that privilege in terms of what I have. And I want to make the most of it. And, people say, well, can you wait to retire? I said, I don't think I will retire. I might work in a very different form, but I'd like to keep working in some form because I love working till the day I die, hopefully, whether it's in small form or whether I'm volunteering or whatever form it might be in. I don't see myself stopping and just kind of playing golf or whatever the analogies might be around. That doesn't work for me at all.
Yeah, there you go. That's really cool. And then I guess building on that question, would you be able to sort of share what your journey was professionally?
Yeah, look, I, like a lot of young people, didn't know what I wanted to do. I just spoke about the fact that I'm really inspired by my father and my grandfather, who also was a really big advocate. I was the first grandchild on mum's side of the family, and I was very close to him. And both my grandfather and my father were both engineers. So I went down that path thinking, I don't know what I want to do. And so I followed their footsteps, different type of engineering, but studied engineering. And I think I must admit, as I've got older, Ben, I can sort of see the fact that I think I was trying on a bit of a mission to prove that I was really smart in Australia. I'd copped a bit of racism and I was on a mission. So I took on a double degree and I wanted to do this and I wanted to achieve this. And, in hindsight, I think some of that was coming from a bit of fear and also just an unknowing of what I really wanted to do. So I started off as an engineer and realised very quickly, a couple of years in, that I probably wasn't going to get into any leadership roles for a very long time. And I was that typical Gen Y, which I know a lot of business owners complain about now, and organisations about, they want everything now. Well, that was me
Yep.
at 21. And so I did an MBA, and then I sidestepped into sales and marketing roles.
Mm-hmm.
And then because I had a bit of the technical and the non-technical and some people and skills, and I had an MBA under my belt, that really started to sort of skyrocket my career. So I started to find myself in where I started, being responsible for small teams and bigger teams, moved around a different number of different organisations through manufacturing and mining, and ended up in a pretty senior role with BHP Billiton when the two companies had merged.
Wow.
And ended up working in their shared services division as a senior leader, and really had an amazing boss, had amazing opportunities, but really didn't enjoy being on the road all the time. I was in my late 20s and I was like, and I, just wasn't in a great relationship. And I took a month off to travel through Nepal, just around September 11. So a lot of people had cancelled their trip. A lot of people don't know that the Nepalese family had been slain around the same time by cousins. So a lot of people were fearful of travelling. But I checked with Australian authorities and they said that it was pretty safe to travel. So off I went to Nepal. And I'm trekking through and I realised that everybody else had cancelled their trip. So it was me, myself and I.
Wow.
With a Sherpa and a guide and a couple of other things. It was a bizarre trip.
Yeah.
But for me, probably it was the first time I had walked in silence for hours.
Mm.
Every day we would walk from one village to another. I'd meet some beautiful children and families. I'd meet, families that lived on the poverty line that would invite me into their huts and offer me, like if there's 5 of them, they would just make a 6th portion and of just rice and water and salt. And, I never knew whether that was their first meal or their last meal. And they were so generous with a stranger who was just happened to be passing through the village. And I felt very touched, very moved, very deeply through this experience. I ended up crying a lot on the trip. And I felt like some sort of a transformation had begun for me. And when I came back from the trip, I really found it difficult to stay within my corporate environment. And also I found it really difficult to stay in my relationship. And so I quit both of those. It's probably the best way. I resigned from both my long-term relationship and my long-term career path, and started up my own business. So I started off, I don't even know what it was called, but I was just going to consult to a variety of companies that wanted to do good with people and maybe have some impact. And that business slowly grew, and I became a speaker, speaking at different conferences, and a mentor for emerging leaders and leaders in businesses, and an author. I wrote some books. And then a few years ago, there was an opportunity to enter the wellness space, which was growing astronomically and still is. Mm. And so I bought into a wellness business and fixed that up, and then have grown that business. And that's kind of 18 years in a nutshell.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for taking us through that. That's pretty impressive. And so what does your sort of day-to-day, week-to-week look like now? Like, where do you sort of spend your time or focus?
Yeah, that's a really good thing. I get so many of these tools from EO. I'm a big fan like you. So one of the things, I read this great book a couple of years ago called The One Thing. And so it's really about, focusing on the one thing a day. So I try and have almost like a mini purpose or a mini focus that is going to be the big thing, Once a month, for example, I'll record my podcast. That'll be the focus for that day. I have a day where I just basically do Q&As and, with clients where my website's called Ask Shivani, so they can ask me any questions, or they just set up some times and we do some of that. So I have these like mini things that I focus on each day. It was also interesting moving states from the wellness business a couple of years ago. Mm. So those businesses are in another state. And I was really worried about those businesses going down in retention of staff and the revenue and the profitability of that business. And interestingly, that business has grown tremendously since I've left. And so my team always pay me out about that. They're like, oh, thank God we are empowered now. You're not rocking up with coffees and wasting our time. I'm like, thanks a lot. But one of the things that's been really interesting to learn on is kind of, this notion of, I remember Michael Gerber coming out with the E-Myth and saying you've got to work on your business and not in your business. But it's been very interesting, and this was pre-COVID that I'd moved. And so working remotely, working on a business that's a bricks and mortar business and a service business, whilst living in another state and doing everything electronically, has been really interesting for me, because it's made me really think about what I'm working on and to work on a few more strategic things and not get so worked up about little operational stuff because I'm not physically there. And then obviously COVID had and continues to hit us in different forms. And so it's been really interesting for me. I've learned so many different lessons in the last 2.5 years and still continue to about working remotely with bricks and mortars and teams. I've got 52 in that team and in that business. And so to be able to run that whilst living interstate has been fascinating for me. So I tend to have some time divided to that. I have a bit of time divided to me. So I'm a bit of a nerd. I really like reading. And so I have just really simple rituals about just going for a walk once a day for 25, 30 minutes with a puppy, or 1 or 2 lots of Pilates a week. Pretty simple. I'm not a runner. I don't do ultra marathons or anything like that. Just the idea, if that makes me vomit, Ben. I just go because, I've got so many friends of mine that are runners. I'm like, you should take running. I'm like, you should take up coffee. Like, really, we should not tell each other what to do because I'm never going to be a runner. And so I do some really simple stuff. I read a fair bit. I really like picking my kids up. I want to be around doing the mundane, boring stuff. So I will usually structure my days where I can do out of 10 drop-offs and pickups, and obviously sometimes there's more with their sport, but I want to be there for 70-80% of them. So 7 or 8 times I want to be there at drop-off, getting a coffee, pick up, and find out from them in that first half an hour what they're up to, what they're doing, what they hated, what they loved. And I try and do sort of work between those hours and a little bit outside of that. And then I've also obviously still got my mentoring and speaking business. And I'm just starting very early stages of another book. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I spend my time.
Yeah, very cool. And you mentioned that you've learned a heap in terms of remote work. That's a topic that a lot of our listeners and clients actually are sort of dealing with and sort of, I guess, in a way, learning through as well. What would be your maybe top 2 or 3 suggestions or the most powerful things you've found with that remote working and remote management of a large team?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think the first thing I've found is when we're so used to doing things. I remember, let me just take an example when I had pre-kids. So I used to work a lot more hours than I did now. And I actually produce less work. Yeah. So when I look at the work that I produce now, I didn't have my other business with 52 staff. So I just had one business with a couple of staff and I was working more hours and I produced less. So then you have kids. Then we had kids and then you go, oh my God, I have to come up with a bit more, becoming a bit more efficient. I want to be around for the kids. How do I do that better? How do I structure my life? Yada, yada. And so then you start to look at productivity tools and how you could do things smarter and what you do. So I think the first thing that I've learned out of the remote stuff is, particularly for those people listening, if they're the business owner or the director or, they've got a remote team is, what are you really good at? Like, what are the skills that you have that you are really awesome at that you bring to the table, whether it's your business or you work in somebody else's business? And so for me, that skill is mentoring. One of the things I'm really good at is getting people clear on what they need to do and helping them take action. So that's a skill I have. So I went, well, that's the part A I enjoy the most. And B, that's the skill that I bring in. So some of the leaders in my team that work for me don't have that skill. Yep. But a lot of my the leaders in that particular wellness business, they're very good operationally. In fact, they've been hired specifically to run operations and be that implementer of those direction or the ideas. And so great. I go, okay, fantastic. So how could I structure my day where I bring mentoring to the table, not once a month, not once a fortnight, but daily? And how could I actually mentor them on a daily basis that helps them get clearer and go faster and take action? So then I just designed a series of questions with them. And they will have a couple of different questions for the 3 key leaders that I work with. Yep. And I use the sporting analogy a bit that, it's difficult for a coach to work with every individual in whatever sporting team, whatever code. Sure. And so often you'll see those senior leaders in those sporting teams that the coach will really inspire and make sure that he or she mentors or coaches, whatever word you want to use there. I use the word mentoring because you're using sort of past experience of what you do. And then you want to translate that into some action. And so if I can inspire my top 3 leaders, then they'll inspire the rest. So often I'll talk to my 3 key people and say, you're my client. My clients are not external clients. My clients are the 3 of you. Yep. Your clients are the rest of the staff, and their clients are the actual clients that we treat and who come into our bricks and mortars businesses. And so just being really clear about what you bring to the table, what you're going to do that. I think the other thing that's really important is the rhythm of how you work. And so I've tried, I don't love meetings. So we call them rhythms. And one of the things we talk about in rhythms is that there's a daily rhythm. So as I spoke about with my family, there's a daily rhythm of what dinner's on, for tonight, traveling around the world. So we call it, traveling around the world dinner. And so then you need to make sure that the ingredients are there and the online shopping's been done. And you already got all of that in there and nobody's rushing out on that day to go out and do that. Same in the workplace. So what's our daily rhythms? Well, what I want to know daily is where are our numbers daily? What are the big bottlenecks that you've got ahead of you for the next 24 hours? And what guidance, what action do you want to take? And let's work through those issues. And most of the time I listen and I might say, have you thought about, what about this? What about this? But most of the time I find that they problem solve things anyway. Yep. And so my job as a leader is to hold space, but have a rhythm around that where that happens daily. And those meetings, for me, I do them between 20 and 30 minutes. So my key part in that business is, 90 minutes a day and having those rhythms of talking to them about what they're going to focus on, giving them clarity, helping them take action, and then literally getting out of the way.
Yeah, wow. So you invest that 20 minutes times by 3 of your key team?
Every day.
Every day. Wow.
Yep.
That's cool. And
because we're a 7-day business in there, we do Tuesday to Saturday.
Yep.
So they're on a Tuesday to Saturday roster. I don't do the Sunday and Monday.
Yep.
And my 3 key leaders work in that roster. And so, they know on a Saturday I'll be between sport and there'll be kids in the car. And so they know on the Saturdays there'll be calls with the whole family with earphones in, or me, standing outside a basketball stadium or whatever it might be. But we just stick to those rhythms of those 90 minutes a day maximum. Sometimes they're 10 minutes each.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's between, 30 and 90 minutes every day. And just getting them to think, because they know that rhythm's coming up, they'll think about what some of the issues are that they need to resolve, where are they stuck, where they need some guidance, and then we'll use that as a sounding board session.
Yeah, cool. Very, very cool. And did you want to share more maybe around your, I guess, your mentoring side of things? Like that seems a pretty big part of what you do in not necessarily your wellness business, but the broader sense.
Yeah, that business is called Leadership Engineers because, the idea is to help people engineer. And really my niche around that is career and confidence. Mm-hmm. So really helping people engineer their careers. And a lot of people think about their career as their next job, or they think about their next business. So I believe that when you're looking at your career, you need to look 30, 40, 50 years out. I know you're in that business, Ben, around helping people around their wealth creation and wealth protection as well. And, we're not going to get our super in Australia till in our late 60s, maybe 70s in the future. And so, I say to people, look, if you're 35, you've got a long way to go to work. And you can't just think about what I'm doing in the next year or 2. You've got to think about where you want to be long term. And so then we help them engineer some of their careers around that. And we also I'm a really big advocate of somebody who's really struggled with self-confidence at times. And I see so many people, and I'm going to generalize here, but more women than men, certainly that feel like that imposter and feel like that they're not good enough or smart enough to apply. And so often they've got their career mapped out and great opportunities, but they miss out or they don't even apply. And so I really want to see more women get into more leadership roles. And so we run certain emerging leading programs and really try and support people to get into the right leadership roles in businesses as well.
Wow, there you go. And that 30 to 50 year runway is pretty exciting way to think about a career. What are some of the questions that you ask the person, or the things you sort of take them through? If you've got maybe like a formula, like maybe not a formula, but some sort of process. Tell us about.
Yeah. I find that a lot of people talk about passion, Ben, and they say, I'm passionate about this, but passion also often comes across as something very fleeting. Yeah. And one of the things I talk to them around passion is, my business was actually called Passionate People for a long time, for over a decade. And I talk about the word passion and I break that up into pass, I, on. And so that if you really want to look at leaving a legacy, you'll often go back to things that you were passionate about. If your relationship isn't working, you go back to how your relationship started. If you're not that passionate about your career, you go back to what got you into that career in the first place. And so it's really about reconnecting to who you are. So, if you're still passionate about that, using that passion as a non-fleeting, non-emotive, the way that our society tells us about, but really to connecting it into pass I on. And what will that look like over 20, 30, 40 years? What will they want to pass on? What will they want to leave as a legacy? And so sometimes, depending on the person or people that I might be working with, it's a meditation, because they're so in their head. So the more head people are, you want to get them out of their head. And I'll get them to close their eyes and start to visualize living that passion out, living that legacy out. And other times I might get them to write it down. Or I know that a lot of psychotherapists and psychologists have talked about, mandalas, where you draw things out and you do some mindfulness practices around getting that out. But I call it, what you want to do longer term can't just come from your head. It has to come from your soul. It has to come from your gut. It has to come from your heart. And, you want that to come, that ideas to come back out of that. And then you want to reconnect your head with it. And so we talk a lot about processes of, we're all here to do something big. And one of the things you need to really determine is what that is. So whether you want to call that purpose, whether you want to call that passion, whether you want to call that your why, whether you want to call that your legacy, whatever word resonates with you, but it's not a short-term fleeting thing. It's a long-term, I'm here on the planet, I think, to do this. And so you want to get that part of it clear, and then you want to link that up into your head. Most of the people I work with are super smart. But where they get stuck is living in the smartness, living in their ego, living in their head, rather than really connecting to something deeper. I'm not sure if that's answered your question.
Oh, it is. That makes so much sense.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely relate to that. And even over the last sort of 12, 18 months, I've asked myself similar questions. Through a few challenges I've had. So yeah, no, really, really, really good share. Now we did connect through EO, and I wanted to ask you, given I think you've been in there for a few years now, what has been your experience with EO, and how has that changed your life?
Yeah, look, I had never heard of EO, which stands for Entrepreneurs Organisation, and my bank manager at the time, almost 5 years ago, introduced me, and he said, "Have you heard of EO?" And I went, "No." And so I met some people through it. Some were pretty new to EO. I was part of EO Sydney when I lived in the Hunter. And now I've been living in Brisbane, I'm part of EO Brisbane. And to be honest with you, Ben, I went into it to 10x my business. I'd heard people had grown their businesses. And so for me, I went, right, I want to 10x my business. I want to learn everything I can and apply it. I'm a bit of a nerd, as I said earlier. Done lots of learning and working with lots of amazing leaders around the world and read a lot. And so I wanted to apply, particularly EO was framed as a learning organisation for me. And I went, great, I want to go in there and learn it. And so I entered it. I started going to as many different courses and online Zoom meetups and face-to-face meetups, and I joined forum. I basically said yes to everything, particularly for that first 12 months. And one of the things I noticed is within 3 or 4 months, I started to notice that my business had started to improve, but it really made me think about how I was living with my family.
Yeah, wow.
And it also started to really make me think about who I was. So EO has 4 pillars, and so it'll divide it into your business, your family, your personal, and your community. And I've always been very community conscious, but I've never really thought about bringing that as a real pillar into my business. And it's definitely made me a better business person. I would like to think, but I think it's made me a better parent. And I think EO has also made me a better human, I would hope. And it really helped me really accelerate the work I wanted to do in community. I have a real passion for educating girls in third world countries. And I did little bits of it. I would sponsor 1 girl, we'd sponsor 3 girls. Oh, great, we sponsored 5 girls, and I wanted to do something at scale. And so one of the great things was linking how to grow a business and linking a percentage of the profits into that became a really big goal for me. So I found EO really helped me connect my community piece, and having that as a pillar, like not as a little side extra thing, but as a quarter, like really one of my 4 pillars, and connecting my business and connecting my family and connecting me. into it. So I can't describe in words how much value it's added to me and continues to add to me. And, you know, I have some really deep friendships which I've had for 10, 20, 30 years. But, you know, there are some people I've met in EO who I might have known for 2 years or 3 years that I feel like I know almost as well as people I've known for 20 years, because it's a non-superficial, deep conversation, a deep look at yourself where people are there to really support and help you. I've been part of lots of different business networks, but I haven't really found anything, and I'm not good with fluffy. I mean, I can bullshit my way through lots of different things, but one of the things that I really seek, and I really value, and I really have looked for those deeper conversations all my life. And, I know that they take a long time to develop, whereas I noticed I would come into EO and all of a sudden within 5 or 10 minutes, I'm having this really deep conversation. So that fills my cup up, that fills my soul up, because I feel in a safe space where I can be who I am. And I think coming also from an Indian family where there's not a lot of people running their own businesses, even the people that are working and they're very highly educated, lots of doctors, lots of lawyers, lots of engineers, lots of architects. I'm also almost like one of 2 people that started up their own business in all my extended family. And so I felt a bit weird. People I didn't get why I quit the corporate job. I just knew I had to. I knew I had to go and do something else. So it's so nice to be surrounded by a tribe of people that, I don't know, that are crazier than me, that are running like 8 businesses. Somebody I met running 8 businesses. I'm like, okay, good. I'm not an idiot. I'm only running 2. This person's running 8.
Yep.
This is good. This is my tribe. Anyway, I could go on, but it's really supported me. It supported me a lot in me being a human. And this morning I was on a Women of EO call for Australia and New Zealand female members. My God, that conversation was deep. My God. It's probably the deepest conversation I've had all month. And, lots of laughter, lots of tears. And I'm so grateful for that community.
Yeah, it does some amazing things. Every month I go to a forum and these, people are sort of sharing their, the things, their experiences and what's, I guess what they're looking for help with. And they think that, they're the only one. Oh, sorry, the misconception might be that they're getting the value, but I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness, that is so relevant for me in this bit of my life. And it's just massively transformational. So yeah, really, really cool. Alrighty. Well, in terms of if people want to reach out to you or follow you, we spoke about there's a couple of ways that they could sort of check you out. The first one is the Ask Shivani podcast, which we'll have a link to in the show notes, and also Shivani's website. But could you tell us about the 15-minute chat that you offer? Yeah,
look, I've worked with a business coach and they were going, you're crazy, you shouldn't be offering 15 minutes thing, you've got to value your time more. But as I said earlier, I like deeper conversations, and I'm not going to enter a relationship with people until I know that there's some resonance, unless I feel like that there's some like values, unless I feel like there's some sort of a connection, like a deeper connection. So what I wanted to do was just to say, hey, it's called Chai with Shivani because I love chai. And I have a pot right here next to me, Ben, and I drink sort of herbal teas all day long. And so it was just to say, hey, if you've got some stuff, particularly around the niche, around your career, around your confidence, you might have a great podcast guest that you want me to speak to. You want me to be on your podcast like I am today. So if you just want to jump on a call and say, hey, hi, look, this is what's going on. I can then take you through some of the work we do. Or perhaps I could just point you in the right direction in terms of, what you want to do. I had somebody that reached out this week that wanted a speaker specifically on health. And I said, look, I don't talk about health because it's not in my top 3 passions. It's important to me, but I don't prioritize it. However, I've got access to maybe 5 or 6 amazing speakers on health. And so, let me just point you in the right direction. And one of these 5 people will so do your conference justice. So, yeah, if you are kind of thinking about an area that you need some transformation, just hop on the link, book 15 minutes, bring a chai or a coffee or a water with you, and just let's have a chat to see where you are and what you need.
Yeah, wonderful. All righty. Well, again, thanks so much for your time today. I've learnt heaps. I've got notes for myself, but also that I'd like to sort of share with the listeners as well. So, again, really, really grateful to you, and hope to chat soon.
Thanks so much, Ben. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you.